Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to colleagues joining us from all over the world to mark what is really a tragic event and what is a tragic day. And that's tomorrow, the 25th of September. And of course, it's in the context of Afghanistan, which, as you will see from your newspapers, is an unfolding tragedy. Colleagues, you join us here really to focus on one particular community that has been facing a history of oppression. We call it a history of tyranny. And while your notebooks and while your history books on the tyranny may not have focused on this particular community, the Hazaras, actually you will see that what has been happening to this community over a period of time reflects this idea that politics and power can destroy and damage for a very long time communities that were once thriving. So I'm delighted to have you here with us. I'm hoping that today you will get an insight into this Hazara population. Essentially, around 9-10% of Afghanistan is Hazara. Afghanistan is multi-ethnic, has many different ethnic, religious, linguistic groups. Hazaras are one among them, with a very rich tradition that over time has been dismantled and dismembered to a variety of different regimes. And I'm hoping that what we will do is hear a little bit more about why tomorrow, 25th of September, marks a particular event that we need to be mindful of. But this isn't just about the past, colleagues. This is about what's happening here and now. We will talk to you a little bit about the plight of the Hazaras right now, right today in Afghanistan, as the Taliban have taken over that particular country, creating a whole new scenario of threat and a prospect of tyranny that is still to come. But we don't simply want to leave you with an engagement or a perspective on this community that is about victims, because Hazara culture is rich and a very, very important and dynamic part that really links South Asia to the rest of the world. And I'm hoping that what you will get today is an interest in this community, encouraging you to delve more into their own history, but also into their contemporary present, which is fascinating. So without further ado, let me just hand over to my colleague Samravit Gauksa, who's head of communications at Minority Rights Group International. And colleagues, she's here really also as your proxy. We realize in a conversation like this, we call it a sofa talk at Minority Rights Group International. And in our sofa talks, what we try to do is to effectively sit as we would on a metaphorical sofa. Of course, these days, an electronic sofa has to stretch continents, and it can. And essentially, we want to engage you in our conversation. And Sam will tell you how we can do that. But Sam, would you want to say something, please?
Sure thing, Joshua. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It's really exciting that we're able to hold this event. And you're going to hear from amazing speakers and guests. But we really want you all to be involved in the conversation as much as possible. So just to mention, please use the chat function to share relevant links or information that you want people to access related to what we'll discuss today. If you're tweeting and wanting to spread the news, we always welcome that. Please, there are two hashtags that we're using. That's hashtag MRG Sofa Talk, as well as hashtag Hazara Black Day, which you'll hear about more in the conversation. And lastly, if for any reason you don't want to use the chat function, you can send us comments, questions, queries directly via email to events@minorityrights.org. So I'll put that in the chat function now, but please do stay engaged and converse with us. And any questions you have, we'll relay them to our speakers. That's it from my end. Thanks, Joshua.
Thank you, Sam. So we have two really exciting speakers here who are immersed in a Hazara past and immersed in a Hazara contemporary events. My first speaker, and this no particular order here, is Niamatullah Ibrahimi. Dr. Niamatullah Ibrahimi is at La Trobe University in Melbourne, in Australia. And if you haven't read enough about the Hazaras, and you possibly haven't, I would really encourage you to read his 2017 book, which talks about this struggle. Niamat focuses on a range. Thank you, Sam. There you go. There's a plug for the book. It really is an incredible piece of work that charts a rich historical tradition into a contemporary. But Niamat essentially is also going to talk about other issues that link in, and some of his more recent work focuses on those kinds of tensions that exist. Our second speaker will be Melissa Chiovande. It's a pleasure to have you here, Melissa. Melissa, again, is an anthropologist who's not only worked quite deeply on the issue of the Hazaras and in terms of the contemporary realities around Bamiyan and the places in which Hazaras live now, but also, again, is exploring links to the trauma of a past reality, a past lived reality. So we have two very different perspectives here, but very much focused on the Hazara situation. And so without further ado, why don't I maybe start with you, Niamat, and ask you to tell us really what it is about the 25th of September that marks this particular day in the Hazara minds as a day of particular trauma, and why on this 25th of September should we be particularly mindful of this past event?
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, colleagues at Minority Group International, for having us, for organizing this event. I think this is really appreciated by all of us, and I'm very pleased to be in this conversation. Well, the September is a month which is coming to the end of a long, protracted history of war on the Hazara people in Afghanistan during the 1890s. Just to give you a little bit of context, Afghanistan in the current form and format, with the current boundaries I have behind me, really emerged from 1880 to 1901. This is the time that Afghanistan was ruled by a king called Amir Abdur Rahman Khan. Amir Abdur Rahman Khan came to power at the end of the Second Anglo-Afghan War from 1878 to 1880. So Amir Abdur Rahman Khan, when he came to power, he tried to consolidate his power over Afghanistan. Afghanistan was a rich country in terms of its ethno-linguistic diversity. There are many groups in Afghanistan. We still see that being reflected in the map, the one we have behind me. This is reflective of the fact that Afghanistan is located in this sort of roundabout between different regions with very rich historical and civilizational exchanges happening across the regions. And Hazaras were one of those main ethno-linguistic groups in Afghanistan during the 19th century. So to consolidate his rule over Afghanistan, Amir Abdur Rahman Khan relied on a few important instruments. One was his reliance on British patronage, which came in the form of financial subsidies, weapons, which were supplied to him by British India at that time. Second, he made extensive use of Islam as an instrument. He declared himself Amir, and that's why we call him Amir Abdur Rahman Khan, and similar to the titles that are being used by other figures in contemporary Muslim politics, including the leader of the Taliban now. And third, he also used a very brutal policy of mobilizing one community against the other. Throughout the 1880s, he did this against different other groups, including many Pashtun communities, including other groups in the north of Afghanistan. And then from 1891 to 1893, he focused his effort, his campaign on the Hazaras. The Hazaras who occupied an area behind me, the sort of the darker green here in the center of Afghanistan, called Hazarajat, was much bigger than it is now. It extended into northern Kandahar, included the province of Uruzgan, many parts of the province of Kabul as well. So in that war on the Hazaras, all of those factors came together. Religion, he used a clerical statement, a fatwa, to declare Hazaras as infidels. And he had obviously had access to all the financial resources and military hardware that he was receiving from British India. And he also mobilized all other groups against the Hazaras, promising them to gain a share of the war booties, which included the Hazara land, property, and most importantly, also Hazaras as slaves. So during those 3 years, we had this really brutal military campaign, which in my book, The Hazaras and the Afghan State, I argue is a genocide. I use a very basic definition of genocide, which was initially proposed by Raphael Lemkin. That is to destroy the national pattern of the oppressed group and to reimpose the national pattern of the oppressor. That is exactly what happened in Hazarajat. The Hazaras lost a very substantial part of their population in the course of this conflict. Many were killed in those areas, and tens of thousands of people were sold into slaveries. And the Hazara lands, really extensive rich part of the Hazara land were redistributed as a booty, as a reward for people, and mostly Pashtuns, who participated in that war effort. That war came to a conclusion around August, September of 1893. So it lasted for about 3 years. So this is really an important pivotal moment, not for the history of the Hazaras as a community, but also for the history of Afghanistan as a nation. And this is, remember, the founding moment of Afghanistan as a modern state. So it really left this deep wound in the fabric of the Afghan society, and this really profound trauma, among the Hazara community, who would not now talk about the present situation without having a reflection on what happened during those 3 years to the Hazaras in Afghanistan. So I think this is a very quick overview of the situation. I would be quite happy to come back to it in later questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Niamat. And you can clearly see the grasp of how you can cover that much history in such a succinct answer. Thank you very much for that. Now, Melissa, we have, you welcome back, first of all. I'm glad that your internet came back. It's good to have you with us again. So Niamat has given some background about this 25th and the trauma of the 25th. And I wonder if you could maybe comment a bit about that. We also have an immediate question on Facebook. I referred to the Hazaras saying it's about 10% of the population. Of course, there are huge difficulties in counting populations. The figure that we actually have is 9%. But of course, there's significant isolation of Hazaras, there's difficulties in counting. I'm wondering if you can just say a little bit about your perspective on the 25th and what you found in your work on the Hazaras.
Yes, thank you very much. And I apologize for the internet problem again. So my work focused on cultural trauma and collective trauma felt by Hazaras, and the way that this trauma was shaped by a group of civil society activists, most of whom were living in Bamiyan, Afghanistan at the time that I was doing my work. And so I think what might be interesting to focus on with respect to this particular day and looking back at the wars that happened in the late 1800s is the fact that I found that there's sort of a timelessness to the trauma felt by Hazaras. It's something that, even though the activists I was working with were trying to find a different future, there was a feeling that it was somehow inescapable that this would continue, that it extended into a distant past, into ancient history. And so people would talk about things like a culture that derived from Silk Road era, when there were many different religious groups and ethnic groups and peoples mixing in that era, and a belief that this was really the cultural background of Hazaras that they brought with them to the future, but that somehow this had been lost, and that now they were this, quite isolated group of people, kind of feeling very cut off, and that it would extend into the future, that persecution of Hazaras continued, and a feeling that it almost felt inevitable that it would continue into the future. But what I found was that the kind of the linchpin, the thing that held this past and this future and present together was in fact the Rahman. This was kind of always be compared to, right? So like the Taliban events in the distant past would be compared to him. Sometimes people would talk about, and I think we're going to get to this in a minute a bit more, but we'll talk about the Mongol invasions, you know, as a group of people who would come in and had also done violence against the population who had been living in the area, who were seen as ancestors of Hazaras as well. They would be compared to Abdur Rahman. So this was really seen as like the kind of almost root of the problem, even though it was understood to have started before and something that would continue into the future. And of course, where we are right now, the fact that this was seen as continuing to the future, it seems like it's come true. So that's also quite concerning at the moment.
Thanks for that, Melissa. Sam, you have a question, I think.
Yes, I do. There's a question that came in on Facebook that I'd like to pose to both of you, Melissa and Yamat. The question is, can you give me an explanation of how Hazaras are descendants of Genghis Khan? This ideology was spread by Abdur Rahman in order to legitimize genocide of Hazaras. Maybe Melissa, you can go ahead and answer that first.
Yes, so I think number one, you know, I want to say it's a bit problematic to try to kind of obsessively figure out like who Hazara or anybody is descended from, right? It's not that there's, you know, one Hazara ancestor, and this has been written about by Hazara authors, in fact, quite extensively. That, you know, probably Hazaras today descend from a mix of people. One of those groups of people are probably Mongols who did come to Afghanistan, and there is plenty of evidence for this, right? I mean, facial features, certain words that kind of might persist that can be linked to Mongol language and things like this. But unfortunately, there's been this, and it's probably kind of this, you know, very colonial idea, right? This idea that you kind of have to label and put people into boxes and whatnot. There's been this idea put forward that Hazaras are like just left over from a small group of 1,000 soldiers of Mongols, right, who were left behind, and that this is what the Hazara population comes from. Part of the reason this is believed is because Hazar means 1,000, and then Mongol soldiers were grouped into, I think that was Ming, right, were grouped into kind of what would you say, groups of 1,000 soldiers who would move around together, battalions, right, something like this. And so that one was left behind, and so all the Hazaras descended from them. Again, yes, there is most likely, surely, some Mongol descent, but there's also quite a bit of mixing. The problem is that I think that this idea has been, you know, during the time of Abdur Rahman and also today, weaponized against Hazaras. And so it's used by those who would want to do harm against Hazaras to make the claim that they do not belong in Afghanistan, that they do not belong in the land where they live, that they are themselves intruders, that they are themselves invaders. And so whatever has been done to them has somehow been okay and right because they don't belong in Afghanistan anyways. And of course, I mean, this is absurd. Even if Hazaras were just a bunch of Mongols who were left in Afghanistan, we're talking centuries. So this doesn't stand anyways, but that isn't the reality anyways. This sort of connection to Mongols as something very negative, unfortunately, continues to this day too. And so I still find this, and I found this when I was doing my research quite often. You would find people who were displaying prejudice against Hazaras would say things like, oh, but they're just a bunch of bloodthirsty Mongols. Like they're the ones who came in and committed violence in Afghanistan and so don't belong here. You know, because everybody knows Genghis Khan was just somebody who ravaged all of the places that he came into and took over. So therefore, this is what Hazaras represent. So this is yes, really a very problematic narrative, and it is something that many Hazaras try to work against and reject, and to link themselves to kind of a different heritage than that of Genghis Khan. Not all. Some see this as a powerful person, that maybe they would want to be linked to. So.
Thank you for that. I mean, and in a sense, this is always this issue of who wrote the history and what perspective did they write it from. And these kinds of narratives we see not just in Afghanistan, but Niamat, as you will know, also wider in South Asia, these kinds of origin myths are now turning up into our contemporary realities to try and pillarize and polarize. But Niamat, I mean, I wonder about your perspective a little on the origin. We shouldn't focus too much on it because, as you say, Melissa, very rightly, Hazaras are a community here and now. And, there we go into this idea of which ethnic lineage is the most clean. It's a pointless conversation. But similarly, Niamat, one of the Facebook participants has said, why are we distinguishing Hazara from other minorities in Afghanistan? Because there are other minorities in Afghanistan. Some may be of the same size, some may be smaller, Tajik, Uzbek, Pashtu to a certain extent. Why a focus on Hazaras? And of course, in the context of tomorrow, what is the importance of focusing on Hazaras?
I think I would like to really reinforce the point which was made by Melissa. I think this whole debate about the ethnic origin is absolutely futile. I mean, it is not only for the Hazaras, but also for any other ethnic group. I mean, no sensible social scientist would even claim, that Pashtuns or other groups around the world, around that region, descend from one particular lineage. I think, I think the main point I would like to just add is that, this is the legacy of colonial imagination, colonial writing, colonial attempt to make sense of that situation, that has created this sort of distortions, some of which were, I think, incorporated by or adapted by some Afghan nationalist historians. And as a result, now there is this sort of historical contestation on who came first. I mean, Afghanistan, this nationalist historiography claim has a 5,000 history, right? But we know for matters of fact that, as Afghanistan today didn't exist before 19th century. It was a place part of different kingdoms, some of which were based in somewhere else, some of which were in Afghanistan. The same is true of, I think, of ethnic identities. I believe ethnic identities, the way they mean today, were totally different in 19th, 18th century Afghanistan. Look at the way Babur, for example, described ethnic identities when he arrived from Central Asia in Kabul. He listed his own ethnic identities. So where are those categories? Some of them have just completely disappeared. So now I think coming to the question on, why we talk about the Hazaras, I think there is an important reason to talk about the Hazaras in their the particularly unique history of oppression and persecution in Afghanistan. And I think it is also the history of the Hazaras is also one through which you can see the history of the rest of Afghanistan. And I think, in my own perspective, it is when we talk about the Hazaras, we should not see it at the exclusion of others, right? This is a country, after all, at least over the past 40 years, all groups have suffered in different ways. And all groups have the potential to come and contribute to the well-being and peace and prosperity of that region and that country. But I think the Hazaras, I think there is a really important reason from human rights perspective for security of that region to recognize the particular set of challenges and threats the Hazaras face. It is not only the long history of the 1890s. We look at the history of the Taliban in 1890s. And the Taliban, everyone suffers, but look at the history of the massacres of the Hazaras in Mazar-e-Sharif and other parts of Afghanistan, and the way the Hazaras are now excluded from all spheres of life under the Taliban. Maybe we can come back to it later, but I think that is important one to see how those are historical continuities unfortunately makes it a difficult, a unique situation for the Hazaras, but that in no way means that other groups are having a very peaceful, prosperous life in the country, unfortunately.
If I can follow up with just another question that's come through, well, not a question, but a statement that's come through Facebook. One person says that I can't believe people are blaming Hazaras for the crimes of Chingiz. Our tribe didn't even exist till after Chingiz's grandsons started ruling around Afghanistan. Even then, the Mongol battalions were made up of different ethnicity. The hate needs to go. That was hundreds of years ago. What would you say in response to that comment? And though the hate was from hundreds of years ago, how are we seeing this play out today as well?
Is it for me, Sam?
Yes, please. Why don't you start now?
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, we have already said some points, both of us, that I think helps understand that situation. I think, the fact that you imagine Genghis Khan as, Mongol, all of his army coming from Mongolia, I think is really, historically inaccurate assumption to make. I mean, forget in the 13th century, Central Asia. Look at in the 18th, 19th century Afghanistan, Ahmad Shah Abdali and other kings and empire builders of that region. I mean, they wouldn't identify with ethnic groups, nations, or nation states the way we understand them today. It was a completely different world. Someone would, emerge as a victorious in a conflict somewhere and then mobilize other groups, from other parts of the world and just rampage from Central Asia all the way to South Asia. I mean, could the Mongols of today do that had it not been for the participation of other groups along the way? I mean, all groups in Afghanistan who resided, I think, participated in that war, either for or against it. I mean, it was a completely different system of rule, which had very different type of relationship with the people they govern in Central Asia, in Afghanistan. I think that is completely absurd. I think from a historical perspective, I mean, there is no basis for that. However, I mean, these are claims that are made, and this are, I think, again, comes back to that sort of history of nationalism, nationalist history writing. And that sort of imagination. And I think that unfortunately becomes quite prevalent in contexts where countries are in crisis, right? They try to find a way to craft a historical narrative that shifts the blame on other groups. And that sort of historical contestation is really part of the day-to-day struggle for power now in Afghanistan. Maybe Melissa, I think, can add to that.
Yeah, perhaps we could add to it. But Melissa, I mean, in a sense, it must be immensely frustrating to you as an anthropologist to see these almost cultural relics. You almost relicize a particular community and you paint a pathos of victimhood on this Hazara community. I mean, could you tell us a little bit about the Hazara traditions that have existed and continued to bind the community together even today, and maybe what's happening to those what kind of threat that this community faces in the last 8 months? I know the world's press is now focused on Afghanistan since the fall of Kabul. Of course, Hazara communities have been talking about this wave coming for the last 7 or 8 months. Could you maybe say a little bit about that to our listeners?
Yes, certainly. So I mean, it's difficult to talk about, what exactly is Hazara culture and what it isn't. And of course, there's so many different aspects. But I can say that, what I did find and what was very interesting was, again, this kind of real focus on mixing and this sort of awareness that Hazaras do descend from many different populations in the area and many different cultural traditions. So when I would be interacting with people, they would, point to something that they do and say, well, we actually think this probably is something that we got from Zoroastrians, even though, now we're Shia Muslims and we feel that very strongly. We do have some understanding that maybe certain wedding practices or, things like that you would find in some villages, there would be this idea that it was linked to something earlier and that came before. Hazaras have very rich music and dance and, song tradition that they have been known for, really, really displaying over the last 20 years with quite a lot of pride, even though certain conservative elements in Afghanistan, both from outside of the Hazara community and from within the Hazara community might frown upon this sort of thing. There was really kind of a push to revitalize these sorts of traditions and whatnot. In Bamiyan, there was a Dambura festival, a music festival that was like really highlighted and showcased, in which both men and women took part and girls, and that was really something. So you had these sorts of things happening. I think Hazaras have been noted as really particular because Hazara women tend to have, I guess, you could say a lot more possibility to take part in different spheres of public life than women in other Afghan groups always do. And again, I'm not saying this is 100% the case. You certainly have Pashtun women who do incredible things, but this is something that was really widespread among Hazara communities. And so that was something that was very kind of beautiful to see, where, the way that Hazara women were very strongly taking part in public life, both in the arts, but also in government and in sports activities, all sorts of things, that you would see this. These are things that are like, all of this is threatened now, of course, right? Because these are all things that the Taliban is opposed to. I mean, women in the public sphere, I don't have to go into that too much. You probably know, right? What's happening and what will probably continue to happen there. Those sorts of opportunities are closed. But just the idea that there might be a public expression of music or music festival, this probably also certainly won't be allowed to continue. And that's really sad, because that's something, again, that I think was a loss that Hazaras felt because of the past history and because of the oppression they went through. There was a loss of this sort of culture, music and song and dance. There has been in Afghanistan a tendency towards a homogenization of these sort of localized cultures, right? So like the idea that maybe there's one national dance, right? And so this is our national dance. And so other more localized dances like that would be more specific to groups like Hazaras were not there were real efforts made to revitalize them and to put them back out into the public sphere, and this sort of cultural heritage is going to be lost. And that's not the only thing. I mean, we could talk about the destruction of heritage sites. Probably everybody knows what happened to the Buddhas in Bamiyan, which, again, there's sort of a contestation as to whether this should be considered part of Hazara heritage, because, they're Buddha statues that were built by, people who lived centuries ago in the region. But the fact was that they were deeply meaningful for Hazaras. They are deeply meaningful for Hazaras, and you can't disconnect that. That's something that I've actually written an article about to bring up our work, called Sacred Blasphemy, that looks at kind of the way that Hazara attachment to the Buddhas was cut and covered up when their destruction happened. We've seen, destruction of kind of contemporary statues already related to Hazara political figures, or I think you could say cultural figures in mythology have been destroyed as the Taliban have come to power. So this seems to be an ongoing thing where you have a threat to cultural heritage as well as the threat to the lives of people themselves, which, I can't emphasize enough that also is happening.
No, thanks for that, Melissa. And certainly recommend reading that article on the sacred places, because there's this element. It shows you how hybridized cultures can be and how central, despite them not being Buddhist, how central the statues were to Hazara culture. But Niamat, I mean, we've talked about physical destruction. Of course, last time the Taliban were on their paths, that those statues fell. Here we are again. Can you say a little bit about the threat, the physical threat that the Hazaras face right now? And also we've picked up stories about even evacuations that discriminate against Hazaras who might have the same kinds of papers, who don't get into the Kabul compound for getting those planes out. I mean, what can you tell us about what's happening right now and the threats that the community face?
Well, I think the level of threats facing the Hazaras are quite really serious at the moment. What we have seen over the past few weeks and months is that the Taliban took control of Afghanistan, including the Hazara areas, without a fight. So as a result, we haven't seen those sorts of evidence of mass atrocities and mass killings of people at the local level. And the attention of the Taliban have been primarily focused in other parts of Afghanistan, places like Kabul, Panjshir more recently, from where we are hearing reports of those sorts of mass atrocity, mass killings of people, summary executions. And Malistan, when they took control of it, they have documented reports of summary execution of Hazaras in that area. So now that the Taliban have taken control of Afghanistan, including Hazara areas, we are, I think, looking at different patterns of oppression, rather than direct violent killing of people. I mean, there are reports of those summary executions coming from different parts of Afghanistan, including many Hazara areas. And I suspect we are not getting a lot of those reports for a number of reasons, because there is an information blackout now, and people who are living in Afghanistan are very fearful of reporting those sort of situations. And there are also the local media organizations are in a complete state of fear, and they are unable to report on those sort of situations. So, what I think in the general picture is one in which the Hazaras, I think Melissa already mentioned, they have lost all avenues where they could express themselves politically, culturally. And that has huge economic consequences as well for the Hazaras. Over the past 20 years, I mean, this was not a perfect functioning system. There were a lot of complaints among the Hazaras how they were discriminated against, especially in important sectors of power, such as the security sector. But the Hazaras found relative spaces of autonomy, such as in civil society, media, education sectors, where they could sort of reassert their identity, reclaim some of what they thought were lost from them historically. But now in Hazarajat, what is happening is, I think the sort of historical pattern, unfortunately, which I have discussed in my book, is the sort of complete sort of domination of one group by the other group. I mean, this is true in many other parts of Afghanistan, but I think this is especially acute in Hazarajat. Taliban, predominantly Pashtun, appointed as district governors, police chiefs, and they are in control of those areas. And there are also reports of the way now the Taliban are enforcing mass execution, mass displacement of people. I think some really in a complex, worrying reports coming from Daikundi over the past few days from the province of Gizab. I think the details of which it is still really not clear, but what we know is 800 families have been ordered to leave a land on which they have lived. So this is, again, a Taliban-style government decision-making without a due process. In a matter of 1 month, if you see reports of like that, it is really, I think, concerning. And at the same time, another, concerning development is re-emergence of Pashtun nomads in Hazara areas. There are already reports that in some areas like Naur, they have been using their animals to graze on Hazara farms. And the Taliban have been fighting with the Pashtun because they share common identity, and historically, Pashtun nomads were siding with the Taliban in their attempt to take control of Hazarajat. So just to sum it up, I think there's a lot developing there. The loss of political avenues for participation, the loss of civil society in this space, the loss of media in this space, and also this really radical reversal of power relations at the local level. Which is, I think, really, really concerning from the perspective of the Hazaras. This is an incredibly marginalized group in the past. Over the past 20 years, they found some opportunity to express themselves. Now they see all of those doors are closing to them, and they are going back to the pre-war Afghanistan.
Thank you, Niamat. A very succinct answer again. And while the kind of snapshot of threat we face today is one thing, we've no idea how it's going to evolve and what direction it might take. But participants here have been extremely active on Facebook. And Sam, I understand we have a whole series of comments and perhaps questions that our audience wants to put to our wonderful speakers. Please, over to you.
Definitely. There are a few, I think we'll run through them and you can answer, we'll try and answer as many as possible. So first is in response to what you were saying just now, actually, Niamat, but both of you could comment on the mounting attacks and property seizures that from Hazaras in Afghanistan. In light of these, how might one best mobilize international opinion to resist international acceptance of the Taliban? And that, I think, if you could answer that one first, but following that, one user commented saying, may I also add that especially in the context of a massive pro-Taliban propaganda push on Twitter, how is that possible, dismissing such reports as fake news? So just how do we handle this situation from an international perspective as well? Maybe Melissa, you can start.
First, Melissa, yeah, please.
Yeah. So I know this as Niamat has said, this is really difficult. I think that it's going to be really important to try to get some sort of verification or documentation in the media that these things are happening, right? Because I know these sorts of issues are coming up, and like I know Niamat and me, we're hearing about it quite a bit on social media and from people we know, about the displaced people in Daikundi and other issues, but it's not really gotten media attention, which again, it's quite hard to access what's going on. But I think that kind of really pushing and demanding and believing that this is actually what's happening, right? Because again, a lot of times I think there is this effort to discount it. Is going to be very, very important. So, if there would be any way to get some sort of media coverage of these occurrences, I think that's very, very important. The second part was about whether this is all just fake news. I think before this, incredible occurrence happened when the Taliban took over without any resistance in the entire country. it was very concerning, the amount of violence that was increasing against Hazaras in the months leading up to it. Attacks were happening again and again over the past months, years really, but in the past several months too, you had this really kind of ramped up increase of attacks that were obviously attacks against Hazaras because of their identity, right? Whether it was because of their religion as mostly Shia Muslims, or whether it's because of ethnic, I mean, the reality is some mix of these things, but that was going on. And there is really not another group in Afghanistan that suffers this on such a large scale. There have been some like small minority groups that you could say have some of the religious minorities like the Sikhs and the Hindus, but other than that, what was happening with Hazaras was quite unique. And you know, there are a number of us out there who work with Hazaras, and Niamat, I think, will agree with me, but who say, you know, it's really important that this be looked at as an attempt to commit genocide, that this be recognized as that and investigated in that way. And so that every event against Hazaras be kind of folded into that narrative, because usually you see, right, when these things are discussed about, you see, and it's gotten a little bit better, but you know, Hazaras are targeted about their identity, but there's a real reticence to use this word genocide. But I felt, and others felt too, that this was really important. There has been concerning, and again, this isn't only linked to the Taliban, but kind of among the population in general, when there have been, again, before the Taliban takeover, different kind of skirmishes or disagreements that could be understood through an ethnic lens, there was a concerning trend that was being noted, that in social media and surely on the ground as well, right, language calling for genocide was occurring again and again, and sometimes directly linking what current events to Abdur Rahman and invoking his name, sometimes in other ways, you're just calling out for the wiping out of all Hazaras, these sorts of, but this was happening. This will keep happening, right? This is something that is not just going to disappear. And in fact, you know, my concern is that with the Taliban in control, it will, you know, empower people to feel like maybe they can act on these feelings if they have them, right? So what might have just become talk may now become action in some cases. So that's something that I am very concerned about. You know, and I want to say, I know, because a lot of time there's this pushback that Hazaras get, and especially now that the Taliban's in control, we're seeing more of this. But again, this has always happened. That, but we're all suffering as Afghans. Every ethnic group, every religious group in Afghanistan is in some way suffering, is in some way under threat. And so when Hazaras kind of tried to bring this particular focus on their situation, they're minimizing the experiences of other people. I mean, that's not necessarily the case at all. But, you know, when there is one group that is being targeted because of their identity, that needs to be acknowledged. It doesn't mean that we don't acknowledge that, you know, everybody else is having a problem for a different reason, but they're still suffering and their lives are still very much at risk for just because of generalized violence, or maybe because of their political activities, or maybe because they just live in a very, you know, unstable place where there's been a lot of fighting. These two things can be true at the same time, right? And so I think there needs on what is happening to Hazaras because of their identity does not mean that we're denying any of the rest of this. But it's also still really important to acknowledge that there is a group that is suffering and that is being targeted exactly because of their identity, and that it is being done in such a way that we really should be calling it an intent to commit genocide and look out for that actively.
Niyamat, you want to add to that? I mean, genocide is a very loaded word, and I think international lawyers like me are always really skeptical about using it because it loses its value. But increasingly, we have seen this trend with actual genocides that have happened against the Hazara, where we can see a distinct policy to try and wipe out in whole or part a population of a state. And we are seeing increasingly these pressures where many of those substantive elements are present in the current activity towards Hazaras. And Niyamat, you use this word a lot. I mean, what would you have to say in terms of Sam's question in general on the focus on Hazaras now?
Well, I think, you know, as Melissa pointed out, I think there is a lot of concern with regards to violence directed towards the Hazaras on the basis of their identity, right? And this is something different from what would be everyday violence that target everyone because they live in a violent country, right, during war and conflict. And now coming to the question of genocide, I think it really depends on what you mean by genocide, right? There is this very legalistic definition of genocide, which is included in the 1948 UN Convention on Genocide and Prevention of Genocide. And there's also a definition of it in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. So now the key thing to genocide is, you know, the intention to destroy a group in whole or in part, right? So now another dimension of this to look at is also whether you look at it whether as one single event or as more as a historical process over time. You know, a series of events that happen over a period of time that will have the cumulative effect of destroying a group in whole or in part. Okay, and I think this is, you know, a strong case that can be made, you know, historically. I believe, strongly believe, that what did Amir Abdur Rahman to the Hazaras is a genocide. When you look at any of those really strict legalistic definitions and in any of those legal instruments, you find all of them there, you know, with a lot of important evidence there. You know, there are official proclamations. There are all of those acts you would find in murder, in the creation of situations where people cannot sustain themselves as a group. And now what we see, I think I mentioned earlier, under the present circumstances, I mean, the Hazaras have been using the word genocide in recent years for two different reasons. One, they started using it in relation to Quetta, you know, the Hazara community there, where they started coming under attack. They started using the word genocide, you know, calling on the international community that we are, you know, facing genocide. And then in more recent years, after this attack on Hazaras in Kabul, so now the question is whether they are genocide according to the legal definition. I mean, they haven't really destroyed a substantial part of the Hazara community, right? But there are other elements you can look at. For example, is there an intention in some of these groups, in the sectarian groups, some elements of the Taliban, they have expressed that, you know, intention. I mean, you know, you look at some of the social media feeds of some of these groups, you can find plenty of evidence where they express, you know, that sort of you know, desire for the destruction of these groups. And now looking forward, you know, I mean, there's a lot that we really don't know about Afghanistan in the situation of Hazaras in the coming months and years. If the Taliban reinstitute, you know, a system of rule where they deny the Hazaras any opportunity for cultural, political, and economic expression or autonomy, right? I mean, that may not mean they will go, you know, after killing, you know, tens of thousands of people for the international community to call it a genocide. But when you subject a community to a condition in which they cannot protect their identity, they cannot express themselves, and they are subjected to fear and economic, you know, brutality, you know, what would that mean? I think there's a lot of, you know, argument that can be made that even if it is not, you know, violent genocide, and I think there's a lot, I mean, you mentioned, Joshua, there's a lot of, you know, in a contestation about what, you know, genocide mean. I think, you know, it remains to be seen how the situation will unfold in the future, but I think there are warning signs, at least, you know, to say the least. If some of these groups become in power, the Islamic State in particular, I think they have not hidden their intention to commit genocide on groups such as Hazaras.
Yeah, Thank you. That's a very compelling answer. I mean, the past history of it and the clear intent that's being stated again and again to try and destroy and hold apart the Hazaras. But Sam, we have very little time left, but you've got a number of comments that you can, I guess at this stage, only share selectively before we maybe talk to our listeners about the kinds of things that you can do at this point in time. Please, Sam.
Definitely. At this stage, there are a lot of questions coming in. One really great one in the chat box asked if listeners could share and suggest some books on the history of Hazara. Please keep sharing that information in the chat box, also related to Hazara culture, just so that our audiences can also stay engaged and find useful resources. But some of the questions that have come in for you both, Niamat and Melissa, one is really what role should important and, let's say, powerful states at the international community play to ensure another genocide of the Hazaras does not take place? And I think because we're short on time, I will just keenly ask you, what is it that our listeners right now sitting and feeling very much like they want to show solidarity? What can they concretely do to support Hazaras today?
Do you want to go first, Melissa?
Yes, certainly. So I think on the one hand, and I'll try to answer very briefly, but we have in several countries, I believe in the UK, also there's been something done in Canada as well, right? Movements by parliaments or to try to push to have some sort of recognition of Hazaras as a particularly vulnerable people. This would, impact, I think, first and foremost, like asylum cases and these sorts of things when people are seeking asylum. As these debates are being brought up in Parliament, to really to push the governments to recognize. So as individuals, I'm not sure how it works in the UK, but in the US, we really love to write letters to our congressmen and women, right? So to do whatever it takes, right, to really push the government to take seriously the idea that Hazaras should be recognized as a particularly vulnerable people in Afghanistan because of their identity, and to try to make this an issue. There have been kind of secondarily also movements to try to have recognized as a genocide Abdur Rahman's genocide, and I think that would also be an important step to recognize that historical precedent, because then, of course, once you recognize that, you can kind of see then what's going on currently. It isn't just something that happens now, right? It has connections to kind of very old patterns of behavior and oppression. So I think that is one thing. On the other hand, I think it's just really important to remember Afghanistan is facing a huge humanitarian crisis. This is certainly not specific just to Hazaras, but it's the reality. And so there needs to be some sort of balance between, holding the Taliban accountable for the things that it's doing and the promises that it's not keeping, or, that nobody really thought was going to happen anyways, but also keeping in mind that Afghans are going to be suffering. And we're looking at, food insecurity. Pretty much everyone I talk to that I know personally has enough money for another 20 days to 1 month of food. And there are people who are pretty well off. So you can imagine we're looking at just, there's not going to be any food. Harvests didn't happen this year. The winter is coming. This is going to be disastrous. On the other hand, you have a healthcare system that is completely falling apart, while, from the pandemic point of view, COVID rates are increasing. This isn't the only problem by any means, but it's just one thing to kind of sharply bring into focus some of the problems that are happening. So I think, it's really important that somehow policies are pushed for that will try to ameliorate this humanitarian catastrophe as much as possible for Hazaras and all Afghans. And then one of the things that we hope that we might push the Taliban to do is to, not neglect Hazara areas if they are providing aid or some sort of humanitarian relief that could become a concern. But again, this is going to be a very delicate balance. How do you bring pressure against the Taliban while at the same time not just, really harming the population of Afghanistan if you're cutting off funds and imposing sanctions or something like that can have a really detrimental effect, even if you're trying to do something good in the long term. So trying to find that balance is going to be really important.
Yeah, thank you for that. We are actually out of time, but Niamat, we shouldn't go without you reflecting on, I think, maybe what it is that people should do right here and right now, partly to mark tomorrow as a Black Day in Hazara history, but also how it is that any of our listeners, all of us really could stand up and support Hazaras wherever they are, whether they are in flight, whether they are hungry, wherever they are. What would you say to the wider audience?
Well, I think I would like to reinforce every point that Melissa said with regards to the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan in particular. I think this is really a challenging situation, how to deliver aid fairly and equitably to all population of Afghanistan under Taliban. I think there's a lot of concern out there. I think I just reinforced the concern, but also the recommendation Melissa put there. And I would like to make another point with regards to journalism, media coverage of Afghanistan. I think, given that Afghanistan's, media sector, civil society is unable at the moment to report on their country as they wanted. It is the responsibility of the international media organization to report on Afghanistan more responsibly. That means switch, change direction. Over the past 20 years, much of the media reporting was directed on the Taliban or through the visa of Taliban, journalists trying to embed themselves in Taliban and then take a critical, approach towards the US or the Afghan government was doing. Now I think the situation has changed. I think the media organizations have to take note of that and reflect on the vulnerabilities of communities in Afghanistan that includes the Hazaras. Second, I think communities of Hazaras everywhere around the world, they have taken a number of initiatives. I think in Australia, in the UK, in other countries, I think there are organizations that are directly engaged in fundraising and material initiatives. And they're also supporting, doing lobby activities. So anyone who has access to any of these groups, please support them. And if you don't have access to them, please find them. I think there are many of them around the world, and they are really will be appreciative of any sympathy, support, and you can provide to them in terms of financial donation, support their lobby activities, or just express your thoughts with them. I think this is really a difficult time for people from across Afghanistan, but the Hazaras, as we have already said, have got I think acute in the sense of vulnerability of their own. Thank you.
Thanks, Niamat. Sam, I think you want to interject and then I'm going to close, please.
Yes, unfortunately, we're out of time. So before we close, just wanted to ask all listeners to please continue staying engaged with this conversation. Your presence in today's event is already indication that you're interested and willing to stay engaged with what's going on. Please continue. And also, please keep sharing resources. There's one thing in the chat that I saw I think it's very important to mention. There is a campaign going on tomorrow. There's a link going around called Hazara Black Day. So please, that's a good way for you to show your solidarity tomorrow, to join Hazaras around the world, marking the significance of the 25th of September. You light a candle at any point in the day, take a photo of that, share it online with the hashtag Hazara Black Day. So that's one concrete way, at least to start, to show your commitment to following what's going on and help amplifying the voices of Hazara community members globally. Joshua, I hand over to you to close. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thanks, Sam. I mean, colleagues, we're facing a real threat to people's existence based on this push towards a single authoritarian identity and the rallying of populist ideas behind it. We have a bunch of crises. that are ongoing. The Afghanistan crisis has added on top of it. But of course, there is this threat all the time. And it's crucial, that little light that you might light tomorrow in favor of Hazaras, it's key that we get those little lights going, and that those little lights everywhere in the world start dispelling the incredible, incredible darkness that's threatening to really completely obliterate all of us. But with human action, and we really believe that, with the change in hearts and minds and with our action, we can make a difference to this. And I would just leave you with one thought: we don't have the luxury of despair. We need to stand in solidarity with the Hazaras tomorrow and for a long time. We need to also stand in solidarity with minorities, indigenous peoples who face these existential threats all over the world as populists try and seize power for whatever reason they want it for. So thank you very much for listening. Please do follow Melissa and Niamat and Sam and me and MRG. We are quite active on Twitter. That Twitter world, unfortunately, is also one that's hate-filled. We need to hear your voices. We need to hear the voices of those who are interested in a progressive, harmonious society. But thank you very much for tuning in. We do hope you tune into other SOFA talks that we will have. And please do keep your ideas and your communication coming. And thank you very much, Niamat and Melissa, for sharing your time with us and for all the incredible work that you do. It's been a pleasure to engage with you. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.